So following UFC Fight Night Macau on the post-fight broadcast, they basically dropped a note that Jamahal Hill will be taking on Jiri Prochazka at UFC 311, to where Jiri Prochazka went to his social media as well. MMA Fighting posted about this fight taking place at UFC 311. So I wanted to hop on here and discuss this fight because I think that this is one of the bigger matchups that the UFC could book in a rather stale and stagnant light heavyweight division. But I want to talk about why I think that this is a big fight, why I think it's a fun fight, and why there is massive stakes on it, and how I think Jamahal Hill has actually, despite all the BS with Jamahal Hill, has put himself in a pretty interesting position if he is able to win this fight. And I'll even give an early prediction. So I first want to mention, this is going to be a fun fight between Jiri and Jamahal Hill, right? When you look around the light heavyweight division, there's not a lot of huge names, right? It's kind of like the flyweight division where it seems like if you got a name and you can, get an impressive win, you're knocking on the door of another title opportunity. Now, we just saw Jiri Prochazka compete rather recently. He goes out there against Alex Pereira at UFC 303 on short notice in the rematch. He gets KO'd by that left high kick that Pereira threw, which was a beautifully timed kick. He got dropped with the left hook at the very end of the first round. So he's coming off of a KO loss. And then the fight before that, he goes out there against Alexander Rakic at UFC 300. He wins the fight, but he was taking an absolute beating up until, as Rakic started to get tired. So Jiri has taken quite a bit of damage over his past few fights, despite beating Alexander Rakic and then losing to Alex Pereira again. But this is a big opportunity because Jiri Prochazka is one of those dudes who he has thunderous power in his hands. He's very unpredictable, but it seems like Alex Pereira has his number, right? And I think a lot of people are going to look into it and go, oh, well, Jiri just keeps on losing. And it's like, well, Yuri's basically beating everybody else outside of Alex Pereira. So we've seen this where sometimes there's a specific fighter that has your name. And on the other side, we have Jamahal Hill. And up until Jamahal took on Alex Pereira at UFC 300, this was a guy who, I know a lot of people are kind of shitting on him now. He was one of the better fighters in the division. He still is. I think Jamahal Hill is a very talented fighter, despite what you may think of him and some of his delusional remarks that he's made since losing to Pereira. This guy was on an absolute run. I mean, outside of the submission to Paul Craig, he's going in there beating everybody that the UFC is putting in front of him. The nasty KO over Johnny Walker, which I know people are going to say, well, who hasn't KO'd Johnny Walker at this point? But still, that was a scary KO, one of the first KOs that was scary that we saw from Johnny Walker. He's going out there against Thiago Santos, taking care of business, and he goes out there in a title fight, his big opportunity against Glover Teixeira, to where Glover just went out there and ran through Jan Blachowicz to win the title. Jamahal goes out there and puts an absolute beatdown on Glover Teixeira. And then the injury happens to Jamahal Hill. So Jiri and Jamahal have both kind of had this interesting timeline where they both have had injuries. They vacated the title, which we have to commend them both, because instead of just sitting on the title being like, we're just going to hold up the division until I'm healthy, they vacate the title. They're like, let the division move on. When I come back, just do me a favor. Give me my title fight opportunity. More than fair. The UFC did right by both of these guys. And now we are in a position to where Jiri Prochazka, one of the biggest names in the division, right? And outside of those Poatan losses, he's been starching people. He's been finishing people. And we saw against Volkan Oezdemir. We saw against Dominic Reyes. We saw against Alexander Rakic when he was able to finally close the gap. Jiri is a fan favorite in this division, whether you like him or not. The guy is very talented. He's got dangerous power. So he realistically is always kind of depending on who the champion is, because he's already lost to Poatan twice. But if Ankalaev, who it seems like, Pereira and Ankalaev are going to be fighting, if Jiri can go in there and get a win, I absolutely see a scenario, or if Ankalaev can get a win and then Jiri gets a win, I could absolutely see a scenario to where we see Jiri compete for the title again. But Jamahal Hill, I think Jamahal Hill has put himself in a very, very solid position. And I know you might say, well, what do you mean here? He's fallen in the rankings and he hasn't fought since UFC 300. He's been delusional. The guy can't stay healthy, or whatever you want to say about Jamahal Hill. Jamahal Hill has talked a lot of shit about Alex Pereira since the loss. He's now talking a lot of shit about Magomed Ankalaev, saying, I want to beat him. I want to do this. I want to do that. So when you do that, yes, you're going to receive backlash after you just got KO'd in your most recent outing, but you're opening up the door to possible opportunities for yourself, because if Magomed Ankalaev wins the belt, I think it is a totally, I would assume that they would probably give Alex Pereira the rematch, but the door opens wide open to possible opportunities for other guys. But besides that, Jamahal, there's a chance, there's a scenario to where he could possibly get a rematch with Alex Pereira if Alex wins. So a lot of interesting scenarios here for both guys, but I want to talk about the matchup because when you talk about, Jiri Prochazka, this is a very unpredictable dude in there, right? And I think we've all figured that out by now. And he's got a funky karate, herky-jerky kind of style to where his shots come from the hips. And like I say, like Call of Duty, the dude hip fires. And yeah, it's kind of goofy and a little bit awkward, and it does leave him open to being countered. But the shots come from very odd angles. And when you're so used to seeing guys throw good, straight, clean techniques, and you go in there against someone who's winging shots from their hips, stepping, and switching stances, and these shots are coming from weird angles, he's throwing these very creative strikes, that you can get caught. And we've seen Jiri able to put the pressure on guys, get in their face, get inside that range, and land the nasty power shots that he has. Now, the one thing that does concern me about Jiri is we've seen against Alex Pereira. Now, Jamahal Hill is not Alex Pereira, right? That's where everyone, I think, is getting a little bit lost here, is they're like, oh, well, Alex Pereira's just been KO, KO Jamahal Hill. Well, Jamahal Hill is just easy to KO. No. Jamahal Hill, he's a durable guy, he's tough, and he's got power in his hands. And I do believe that in terms of the technicalities, other than him dropping that rear hand, which is why I was saying Jamahal Hill was going to get KO'd by Pereira, whenever he throws the left hand, his right hand comes down at his hip pocket, and I'm like, Pereira's just going to counter him with a left hook and catch him. Jiri is not Alex Pereira. He is not the same type of striker. While he's still dangerous, he doesn't have the same setups and the same technicalities that Poatan has to be able to land a shot like that. Now, will he try to take a page out of Poatan's book? I'm sure he will. But I believe Jamahal Hill, hopefully, for his sake, he goes back, takes a look at that and says, okay, I got to work on myself. When I'm throwing my offense, I got to be a little bit more defensively responsible, because I can tell you this, if Jamahal Hill is able to get in the pocket in terms of the boxing range, and he is able to get Jiri Prochazka to throw, and Jamahal Hill can keep his hands up and stay safe, there's going to be the opportunity to land nasty counter shots with the boxing against Jiri, because what we have seen from Prochazka is he does get reckless. He tends to move forward. He is in a very dangerous range with his hands low. When you watch a guy like Alex Pereira who keeps his hands down, that's because Alex is at the edge of your strikes, and he has a very, very good gauge in terms of managing distance, to where I think Jiri at times tends to struggle with that. And again, a lot of that has to do with when you're in there with Pereira, that's a different type of striker that you're in there with, a guy that's a master when it comes to setting you up, to where Jiri, I think, felt like he was safe in a lot of those scenarios when his hands were down, and he was actually not safe. So I'm going to be curious to see how Jiri is able to transfer that into this fight with Jamahal Hill, because I do believe that Jamahal Hill is the more technical striker on the feet when it comes to the two. But when it comes to power, and it comes to creativity, and it comes to just that unorthodox herky-jerky, style from Jiri, I mean, anything can happen. An early prediction, I think Jiri Prochazka wins this fight. I think that Jiri Prochazka, as long as because Jamahal Hill is a southpaw, and you got to remember, one of the things that gave Jiri some issues in that, I keep referencing the Alex Pereira fight because those are really Jiri's losses, right? And he's in there against the best guy in the division, one of the best strikers we've ever seen in the sport. We saw, Pereira and Jamahal Hill, so they have a common opponent here. One of the things that has given Jiri problems against Poatan was the calf kicks. Jamahal Hill, he's a southpaw number one, and Jiri's an orthodox style fighter. I know he switches at times, but so I don't expect the low kick to necessarily be an issue, because you got to throw it more of a switch style kick to where it's a little bit easier to time, and you're not, Jamahal Hill's not out there throwing them like Poatan unless, he somehow comes in there and has really been working on that or something. So I don't look for the leg kick to really be an issue against Jiri, which is one of the things that Alexander Rakic used against Jiri, and one of the things that Pereira used against Jiri that gave him a lot of problems. It was something that hindered his movement, made him get desperate, made him have to close the range to where Pereira was able to catch him with the shots, or where Rakic made him desperate to try to close him down, which it actually worked out for Jiri Prochazka, to where he just said, F it, I got to get on the inside, I got to land a shot, I got to get him out of here because I'm getting my legs blown out from under me. So Jiri, if he comes in technical, if he comes in a little bit more defensively responsible, I'm not saying he's got to have his hands glued to the side of his head, because, different fighters fight different ways, and sometimes, they can make different styles work here. Jiri doesn't have to change. All he has to do is be a little bit more responsible when it comes to the range that he is at. I believe that that is where he went wrong. He gets a little bit too comfortable taking too many leg kicks, not getting his leg out of the way. I don't think that's going to be an issue against Hill. So as long as he gets his leg out of the way, he manages the range safely. I think that he has got really good speed in his hands. He's got really, really good power. And the only way I see Jamahal Hill really winning this fight is if he times a good counter shot with the left hand or possibly a check right hook, because Jamahal does have a good left kick. He can throw it out to the body, bring it upstairs, look to maybe throw a high kick because we saw, Poatan land one. But very different fighters than, Pineda, right? So I know people are going to say, well, they both fought Alex, and you keep hearing me compare that. It's because it's a similar opponent. These guys have been on an absolute tear outside of losing to Poatan. Like, these guys are two of the best dudes in the division. They basically lost to almost nobody else. I know they've suffered, something here and there. They are outstanding fighters. They're both dangerous. They have very good power. I absolutely think we see a finish in this fight. And I do think that there is a possibility that Jiri could look to close down Jamahal, get him in the clinch, look to implement some of the grappling, because Yuri's a big guy for the weight class. He's got good power, and we saw him ultimately able to submit Glover Teixeira in that crazy back and forth between Jiri and Glover. I mean, that was one of the craziest fights I've ever seen, to where Glover seemed like he was kind of riding it out to a victory, and then Jiri pulls out a submission out of his back pocket, and to submit Glover Teixeira, I mean, that's incredibly high level. So both of these guys have had some similar opponents. They've had kind of similar results. Totally different fight against each other. They're both dangerous. They both have power. I think Jiri Prochazka, as long as he manages the distance, has an answer for any of the kicks that Jamahal Hill is going to throw. I believe Jiri closes the gap and lands some of those nasty shots with the boxing and is able to put Jamahal Hill out of there. But either way, I think we see a KO in this matchup. Like I said, Yuri's unpredictability, him hopefully finding some solutions to not leaving himself so vulnerable in terms of the boxing defense, I think will serve him well and will help him get the job done against Jamahal Hill at UFC 311. But I want to hear from you all down in the comments. Like this video. Tell me who your early prediction is for winning this fight. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you do not miss an upload. I appreciate it. See you next time.